computer is picking up a strange signal. Here, sir, you better take a look at it.
Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Snacks. I'm Liz J. Bradley, a science fiction author and poet who adores short fiction and snacks. Each episode of Sci-Fi Snacks is a short and sweet, or salty, discussion of what I loved, what I learned, and what I snacked on while reading new-to-me short science fiction. As always, links to the short stories are in the show notes, so if you haven't read this week's story, head on over, pick up your favorite snack, and then join me as we discuss this week's story. Hey all, welcome back! This is episode 3 of season 2 of Sci-Fi Snacks, and I'm your host, Liz J. Bradley, if you didn't catch that in the intro that plays every single podcast episode. I hope you like the music. I think it's fun. It brings me back to the days of old sci-fi, and it just kind of puts a smile on my face whenever I hear it, which is fun for a project that goes on and on and on, to kind of have that musical signature to it, that you hear that in your headphones, you know, you're listening to something else and then that comes on and you're like, ooh, it's my favorite podcast, because of course I'm your favorite podcast, right? Even if I'm not, tell me you love me, tell me you love Sci-Fi Snacks, feed me and tell me I'm pretty. That's kind of the vibe of this podcast at this point. So that's all to say, thanks for coming back and hanging out with me. This week, I'm so excited to dive into a story that I had no idea what to expect. Soilpunk was one of those genres that when I was researching for this season, I was like, somebody just made that up. And spoiler, somebody did just make that up. Everything is just made up. But this was like specifically an organic drinks company sponsors this magazine called Tractor Beam, which is so funny, such a good play on words. I'm obsessed with it. I can't even be mad. That is doing this kind of farm-focused science fiction with Soilpunk. They were the ones to coin that term, which Soilpunk is defined by this company, specifically Tractor Drinks, as radical visions of hopeful futures where soil and earth form our foundational technologies. And they call that Tractor Beam, this is their quarterly publication, they branded this as their Future Farmer's Almanac. And I just kind of like love all of that. It feels so creative. So many times companies come around and, you know, we live in capitalism. So everything is tainted, I guess, by the fact that how does it bring us money? I know my kid all the time will ask questions and he'll be like, well, why is this like that? And I'm like, because capitalism, somebody's making money. This is, you know, why are there many transactions? Like, why can't I have all the things in my game? Well, capitalism. And I feel like that's always the answer. And even in this case, why do we have this lit mag called Tractor Beam? It comes back to capitalism. It's probably some sort of tax haven because I don't see how it's making money. It's just sending money out there, but it's this marketing arm. It's this expense for an organic drinks company because they're projecting that kind of future that they want to see. You know, obviously it's really important to them as organic farmers that the earth is protected and all of that kind of thing. So that's all to say, my hunch that Soilpunk was not a super widespread subgenre was on point. But I also am not mad about it. I really was into this. And I do think that if you're going to do something, do it well. And Tractor Beam, you need to go to the show notes and like click on the link for this story and check out this website, because a lot of the internet for science fiction is stuck in like early internet feel and vibes. I was doing research just yesterday on like author branding and things like that, and going to websites for authors like George R.R. Martin. And you go there and you're like, oh my gosh, I am back at the family computer in the living room in the early 2000s looking at the internet. This feels like a time portal back there. And Tractor Beam feels like the exact opposite. It feels futuristic. It feels like the art is gorgeous. The layout is so thoughtful. Everything feels intentionally designed, like how a business doesn't just slap any old label. Once you get to a bigger business, you don't just put any label on your product. You have teams who design it, who think intentionally about those things. And I can't help but wonder how much of that in this case has to do with the fact that this is kind of a more corporate backing that came up with this design, but this design is so artistic. So they've got people who know what they're doing. And I know what you're thinking now. Okay, this is some sort of weird corporate like propaganda arm or whatever. So like how good can the stories be? This story, oh my gosh. This week our story is called The Electric Ant in Its Natural Habitat, which first of all, super cool title. Titles are hard. Titles are something that to get it right, it has to be something that grabs you with zero context and makes you curious. And this title made me curious. Even if I wasn't already interested in figuring out this genre and finding this story, that title, The Electric Ant in Its Natural Habitat, immediately I have a million questions and I want to know more. It just sounds cool. It's that juxtaposition of the natural world and electricity and, what is their natural habitat and what does that mean and what's going to happen? And is this a story about bugs? Spoiler, it is not a story about bugs. It's a metaphor because literature. Just for anybody who's like not a huge bug person. I get it. This is not an episode about bugs. No worries there. So this week's story, The Electric Ant in Its Natural Habitat from Tractor Beam. It is roughly 4,700 words in the Soilpunk genre. The author is Romy Stott. Romy Stott is an editor of the Hugo-winning magazine Strange Horizons. You can read her work in Analog, The Deadlands, and Atlas Obscura. As a writer-director, she's been a guest artist of the Dallas Museum of Art, ICA Boston, National Gallery in London, and Theatre Now, New York. She is half of the electronica band Stopwalk. Love that. Love a multi-hyphenate creative. I think the more I meet other creative writers, we've all got these multiple outlets of creativity. And as somebody who came to writing, I'm not old, but it feels like I came to writing late. So many people are like, oh, I've been writing since high school and I went to college for writing and blah, blah, blah. Like I did none of those things. I went to school for theater. I worked in theater for a decade. And then when I moved to rural Alaska, I obviously could not do theater anymore. And I was like, I need a creative outlet or I will go crazy. And that's kind of where my writing journey started. And being able to see so many other people who've had similar paths kind of as I pay attention to author bios, because I haven't always, I would skip the back flap jacket bios and things like that. And I just pick up different books or who I'm following on social media or recommendations and things like that. I didn't really dig into I don't want to say personal lives because these aren't personal lives. These are, your professional bio. But I didn't look at those kinds of things before. And now that I've been looking at them, I love to see how our creativity as writers comes from all these different places. And I think that makes us better artists all around. And I love to see it. That's awesome. And now I know you're all curious about what snack I would pair with this story. Now, right this second, I'm like, oh, I could have done ants on a log. Does anybody remember that? From school, you take a piece of celery with peanut butter in it, and then you put all the little raisins and their little ants. That would have been cute. I haven't had that in forever. I know a lot of people are like anti-celery because, oh, it's just water, blah, blah, blah. But like, that's a banging snack. It is not what I picked for this. I went more off of the genre this time. So I was thinking Soilpunk, and a current favorite in our house is dirt pudding. If you've never had dirt pudding before, I'll link to a recipe. It's super simple though. I make it without a recipe. It's just chocolate pudding and then like crushed up Oreo cookies. And that's like your top soil, and gummy worms. So the worms are part of the garden. You can get really elaborate with your dirt pudding. I'm going to post a picture on social media of me with my dirt pudding. I went very millennial coded and did kind of like a layered mason jar. It was very artsy, super cute. I did omit the gummy worms because, hot take, I don't think the gummy worms are actually really good in the dirt pudding. Aesthetically cool, but I don't know, I just can't marry the two. I think it's a texture thing, because if your pudding is really cold, then it starts to make them hard, and that's kind of ew. And otherwise, gummy snacks and then the milk pudding, I don't know. I just left them out. And we'll chat a little bit more at the end about how I think that tied in to the rest of the story. Now let's get into this. What is this story about? I told you it wasn't about actual electric ants. But what this is about is we are in a future setting of Earth where the haves and the have-nots are even more separated. Generational living is more popular in the United States due to the necessity of it. You need multiple people to be able to afford all of the bills and things like that. Our main character, Maria, lives in such a situation with her family, multi-generations on this small plot of land. It's depleted land. It's got some problems with the soil left over from pollution and things like that. But as long as they don't disturb it too much, they're told they'll be fine. At the beginning of the story, she gets a call from an old friend from high school. He's this beach bum who kind of bums around the world and only moves when there's a climate disaster. So like he's living on a beach until there's a tsunami or there's flooding, and he's like, oh, well, I can't live here anymore. So he just moves on to the next place. And they were good friends. They don't really talk as much anymore. She kind of hears from him when he wants to call, that kind of relationship. And at the beginning of this story, Maria gets a call from him. And he's saying that he is going to be sending some people that he's met in his current location who've been affected by this climate crisis to go live with her in the United States. They're climate refugees, but this is still illegal in this world. And she fights back a little bit, but eventually she's like, I knew I was going to say yes. Like, I'm not the kind of person to say no. And he knew that too. So she says, sure, send these people to me. I've never met them, but if you say they're good people, I trust you. So these two brothers and a sister come to the United States and live with Maria and her family. And they learn to love each other and live together. They become this strong family unit. They describe themselves, it's described narratively as like they're a group of ants. You know, they're all working together in this kind of colony. And they end up discovering how to create a battery out of all the ruined soil. The science here is beyond me. It feels sketchy at best, but I'm here for it. I am the type of listener who, if you tell me we did some science and now this thing works, cool. I'm on board. I am so with it. Same thing with like space travel. You're like, hey, this is how we travel between universes. And I'm like, great. I'm not going to fact check you. So I don't know, maybe somebody who knows more about heavy metals and soil and electricity. And I think they talked about like stable potassium batteries. You could look into this. That could be cool. Like maybe this is actually a legit thing. That would be cool. I have no idea, but I'm going to take their word for it that they were able to create these batteries and kind of make a better world for themselves and for everyone. They don't have, there isn't the vibe that it changes their station. They're not all of a sudden the rich people because they came up with this. That doesn't seem to be the point of the ending. And that seems really on par for the other stories in this subgenre of earth punk, solar punk, hope punk type climate futures that I've been reading. So that was interesting. And even though it seems that the minimum income that they were talking about at the beginning of the story has disappeared by the end because they talk about it having gone away. So it seems that they've lifted everyone out of the need for that, maybe? I don't know. The details were a little sparse on that part, but it ended on this hopeful note, and that was really cool. What I really, really loved about this story, though, was how absolutely lyrically beautiful it was. Every single word, every single sentence, I would like stop and be like, wow, that's just like really well written. Even before I didn't read the author's bio, before I read the story, I was just like, this is somebody who understands words and the power of words. I can tell they've read a lot. I can tell they know how to put together a story. I'm going to share some of the lines because they're just that good. And the way that this was formatted too is they had all of these like pull quotes, which aren't usually done in short fiction, like on short fiction websites, but you'll see them in like articles, like news articles, where they'll have the quote in the bigger font. And they did that for this story. And honestly, yeah, it worked because I was stopping, even without those, I was stopping at the end of lines and going back and rereading things because I was like, wow, that was a good line. So some of those were, for her, it was my now silent dad's soul talking to her through a radio, telling her she was doing okay. In context, that line is really, really powerful. That was a good one. Oh, this was a line during the phone call between Maria and her beach bum friend and him asking her to take in these climate refugees. And she said, "Are you asking me to break the law, put my family in danger?" I said with theatrical menace, voice growling and dangerous. I was already pretty sure I was going to do it. We ants always let in the grasshopper. But we have to make a big speech first. I didn't expect Caden to know that, which was the joy of it. Like that line right there for me, when I was going back, I realized how many rules, like writing rules in quotes, that line breaks. It borders on melodrama, but it worked. It didn't feel melodramatic. It didn't feel overwrought. It broke all the rules about only use said. You know, this is one that newer writers fight all the time, is that you're not supposed to have dialogue tags other than the word said because it becomes distracting. It becomes something that you can show it in the characters' actions and things like that you don't need, like in this example, voice growling and dangerous. I said with theatrical menace. Like we get 3 different descriptors here. So we get said, then we get theatrical menace, growling, and dangerous. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot. And like technically, if you brought that to your writers group as a new writer, somebody's going to mark that and they're going to be like, don't do that. Just cut that out. That's too much. But in the context of this piece, where every single line was beautiful, it worked. It was so cool. And like, I think this is one of the reasons people get the advice to read widely. You know, when you're a new writer, they're like, write a lot, read a lot. Those are the 2 things, because you can see where people break the rules. And as you continue to read, you can see why they break the rules. And in this piece, I think what it came down to was the piece itself was quieter. It didn't have a huge, crazy moment. There wasn't even like the hero's journey type quest or big stakes. It didn't feel like big stakes at all. It was just everyday survival. And what kept me going and what kept me reading was just this beautiful prose that kept me looking for the next thing. It was like walking through a museum of just beautiful art, and you don't necessarily know the story when you walk in, but as you see each picture, you're like, yes, I love this. Give me more. That was this story. I have one more that I want to share with you that was kind of like the theme of the story right up front was, then they're talking about this gap between the haves and the have-nots. And it was, thus society was increasingly split into families of wolves and families of ants. The wolves each thought they had lived as ants, and the ants all thought that the story of Oedipus had to be a metaphor for weather patterns or something. And I was just like, there's so much packed into there and it's gorgeous. And I'm still kind of unpicking all of this stuff, but it just shows like the disconnect between the haves and the have-nots. And that they talked about how the wolves, the very fiercely independent, toxic individualism, that when their kids come of age, they kind of kick them out and you have to live like the other folk. It's kind of like Rumspringa, but go slum it with the poor people as opposed to like go live with the English if you're Amish. And then they come back and they go back to their safety net of their world and they're like, oh, I lived like the poor people. And the poor people are just like, yeah, we're just trying to survive. So I thought that was a brilliant way to talk about that without being so on the nose. I think that there's this line in science fiction when you're wanting to, what separates kind of the simplistic morality tales with the pieces that are going to last and that stick with you are the ones that are able to transcend the simplicity and kind of slip it in there. The social commentary is all through this story, but they're not like hitting you on the head with it. It's just infused into the entire story. Okay, so when I was making the pudding with my 10-year-old, he is learning science stuff, and one of the things I love to do when we're baking is we talk about like mixtures versus solutions. And fourth grade science lesson, if you have forgotten, a mixture is something like if you make like Chex Mix, because you can pick out the individual pieces. But when you make pudding, it's a solution because you can't easily separate it. Like you'd have to do something weird chemically or like evaporation. Like it is a whole new thing. You put the powder in, you put the milk in, you can't pull them back out. Like you can like pull out the best pieces of the Chex Mix. This story is a solution. Oh, think about the word solution and the double meaning here. Like this was not in my notes at all. Like I'm having this little brainwave right here at the mic. So forgive me if it's a little wandering, but this story gives us a solution view of the future and the social commentary. It infuses the story with the commentary in such a way that you can't just pull them out. It's not beating us over the head. You know, we can't just sort out and be like, oh, here are the lines about the social commentary and here are the lines about the story, which make it feel simplistic. It's all in there. It's baked in to the story. And I think that takes a lot of effort and it takes craft and it takes somebody who knows what they're doing to write that kind of a level of a story. And yeah, how cool. Look at me making snack allusions on my snack podcast. I love that. Okay, I know I just went through this whole like snack metaphor and everything, but looking at my notes, I have another metaphor. This piece has inspired me with its beautiful language. And I said that I wasn't sure at first where the story was going. It was kind of slow, but I was willing to go wherever the author led me. And slowly, the Soilpunk theme revealed itself, like a flower blooming, planting the seeds early and letting them grow into something beautiful. I know that's a lot. I'm pushing it. But it's true. This story, it really grew on me. And I really had no idea what Soilpunk was going in. And by the end, I got it. I totally got it. And I loved the ride. So I guess what I really learned from this piece primarily is that if you have beautiful writing on a line level, you can have a slower paced story that doesn't move super fast. It doesn't make, pun intended, earth-shattering revelations, but you can keep your reader. And I think that's part of like literary fiction too, is that there are readers out there who just want that beautiful word music. I want to read that over and over again. It's like poetry. I want to do that. I would love to hear this story as a recording, like spoken out loud. I think it would be gorgeous. And this is something that personally as a writer, I strive for that. There's nothing wrong with Hemingway-esque stripped back prose that's just straight to the point. I don't love it. For me, I strive for something that people are going to come away from it and being like, wow, that was a really great story, but also that was a beautiful story, like aesthetically pleasing on a line level. And it all comes back around to when I read the author's bio at the end, and I was like, oh, I get it. So for those of you who don't remember, Romy Stott is the editor of the Hugo-winning magazine Strange Horizons. I have never read something in Strange Horizons that I have not liked. Like everything. It's so good. And so it comes back to Stott has read a lot. I can imagine, even if you're not reading the slush pile as like an editor, maybe you are, maybe you probably started there. You've read so many things and you kind of just innately learn what works and what doesn't work. And I know that I've been volunteering on a publication over the past year or so, and we take nonfiction pitches. So I'm not reading fiction slush, but I am reading pitches, and it has taught me so much just reading a ton of pitches and being like, why does one work and why does another not work? That I'm able to write one now myself confidently, being like, this is what goes in a pitch. And the same thing goes for short stories. You just got to keep reading them. You got to know what's going to hook somebody, what's going to feel cliche, what's going to feel fresh and new. Like, you can't write something fresh and new if you haven't read what's out there, because we all start from these cliched places because that's what we know and it's all we know. And you can't know if you're regurgitating something or you're writing, thinly veiled fanfic of Lord of the Rings because you're a teenager who wishes that the elves would just come take you away into their magical land and tell you you're special and beautiful. Never have written anything like that. But you have to go through that. You go through that phase and then you read more and, you've read more than Tolkien. And I didn't even read Tolkien. I watched Lord of the Rings in the theaters on my birthday and saw Orlando Bloom and was like in love. And then I wrote a whole lot of bad fanfic in gel pen in a black paper notebook with colored glitter gel pens. It was a thing. We've all been there. So I've gone off on a big tangent. I don't even know where I'm going back to. Oh, I want to write pretty stuff that's not just pretty because it's written in glitter gel pen. So I'm going to keep reading and reading things like this and picking apart like what makes those lines so beautiful that I want to go back and read them. And I've got a story, I'm going to say it now to hold myself accountable. I've got a story that I call right now Rock Garden Roses, and I feel like it's perfect for this type of genre, this soilpunk, solar punk vibe. And I want to go back and look at that and see what I can do there, because I think that story is one that it's quiet. There's not a lot going on. There's a lot like under the surface emotionally, but I think it needs more beautiful language. So I'm going to go back and like pump it up and see where that goes. Yeah. All of that to come back around to dirt pudding. I think we connected it rather well. We had a whole metaphor about solutions and mixtures and, the soil. It was a great snack. And yeah, go check out my social media. You'll see my picture of me smiling, holding my millennial mason jar. Mason jars had us in a chokehold for several years. So I have a whole bunch. I might still use them. Reuse, recycle. See, that's like soil punk vibes too. I'm going to leave you with this little call to action at the end of the podcast. Go touch grass today or find some soil. Bring it into your life. Go pat the ground. Maybe you have a succulent in a little pot. Give it some love. Water your plants. If you have not watered your plants, this is your reminder. Go water your plants. touch grass. Have a great day. Next week, we have the story After the Rain by P.A. Cornell. That will be linked in the show notes as well, so you can get a jump on next week's story. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to chat with you again next week. Keep on snacking.